Thank you and welcome on behalf of ISMETA, the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association. My name is Elizabeth Osgood Campbell. I have the privilege of serving as the executive director, and I welcome you on behalf of our board of directors and our operations team to this ongoing podcast series hosted generously for many, many months now by Jamie McHugh. Jamie is the creator of a body of work called Somatic Expression, Body Wisdom for Modern Minds. He is a long-term ISMETA member and a very powerful contributor to our profession. Jamie, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. A little thing came up. I wasn't sure what it was. Welcome, everybody. I'm really happy to inaugurate this series of Earth Matters. This is Earth Matters 2.0. Last year we had 6 sessions, and this is the inaugural edition of Earth Matters. And I quite honestly wasn't sure if I would start this series again. It's just kind of like, do I really want to do this? Is it still worth my time? There's a lot of things I'm involved in. And then around the time, right before the election, we had a kind of an open call of people coming and offering ideas and brainstorming. And at the end of that, still wasn't sure. But then I realized if I'm not willing to continue to step up in this conversation and to really continue to beat the drum for earth preservation, life preservation, the preservation of our exquisite, delicious soma, if I'm not willing to do that much, what good is that? What good is that? And particularly those of us in the US know that after the election, which was kind of a gut punch, and a lot of people really retreated from public discourse, done with politics. And I understand that. I feel that in myself. I feel the collective despair right now as we grapple with dancing with uncertainty. What's next? And so I want to begin this series with the words of one of our great teachers, Dharma teachers, Joanna Macy, who talked about this idea of active hope, which I think is pretty important because it's easy to feel hopeless right now. She talks about active hope, and I want to share these words as we start. Active hope is a practice, like Tai Chi or gardening. It is something we do rather than have. It is a process we can apply to any situation, and it involves 3 key steps. First, we take a clear view of reality. Yeah, not really fun all the time, but take a clear view of reality. Second, we identify what we hope for in terms of the direction we'd like things to move in or the values we'd like to see expressed. And third, we take steps to move ourselves or our situation in that direction. Since active hope doesn't require our optimism, we can apply it even in areas where we feel hopeless. The guiding impetus is intention. We choose what we aim to bring about, act for, or express. Rather than weighing our chances and proceeding only when we feel hopeful, we focus on our intention and let it be our guide. And I think all of us, as movement people, as somatic movement educators and therapists and artists and activists, that's a pretty important guideline for moving forward. How to instill this in our own soma and how to connect with other somas to create which I'll get a little further into with Linda. This is one of the themes of her book, how we create a nest together. And this idea of a nest that can really support us and help us collectively move forward is vital. So, without further ado, I want to welcome Linda. And, Linda kind of came into view thanks to Ismeta. There was a note about her book, and there was the link to the preface, and I read it, and I was like, oh, of course I want to invite Linda, because so much of what was said in the preface of your book spoke to me deeply. And I just thought, yes, this is a good place to begin, from the soul of the work out into the world. And how can we really find our center in the soul of this work? So, Linda, welcome. I've known about you for years. I mean, your book, Wisdom of the Body Moving, I think if I remember correctly, it was from 1989. So you go back in my consciousness a long time. And we finally met a couple of weeks ago, and it's kind of like, oh, where have you been? A lovely kindred spirit. so, so anyway, welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. Yes, absolutely. And where have you been? Not in my life, but I'm also have been aware of you and your work, different moments. So thank you. And just thank you probably from all of us here for continuing to beat this drum, for bringing these conversations to a wider audience and bringing um, the fields of somatics and ecology together. It's like this phrase, ecosomatics. Yeah, it feels so important that we place ourselves in that wider context.
Mhm. So I want to just kind of jump into, because it was the preface that grabbed me so deeply. If you could say a little bit about the book and just kind of what inspired you to write, because those of us who've written or write or try to write know what an arduous process it can be, and so I'm curious what moved you to really bring that forward and to say a little bit about the content.
Mm. When it's flowing, it's not arduous at all. It's like a love affair. It isn't always like that, but it can be. And it was very much with this book. I absolutely loved most of the process of it. It really wanted to, the book wanted to flow, the book wanted to be written. I had an idea for a long time that there was one more book, at least. I don't know if it's the last one that
Hmm.
I wanted to write. So it was gradually forming over a number of years. And just before COVID, just before the pandemic, really, it began to take shape. I had time and space to work on it. So, gosh, what can I say? An article that I wrote, a chapter I wrote for a book about embodied spirit. What was it? Embodiment of spirit, from embryology to embodied relational spiritual practice. It came together when I was invited to write this chapter.
Hmm.
And I think that helped me to start to formulate what I wanted this new book to be about. So
Hmm.
something about the embodiment of spirit and the connection with earth consciousness. I think it's just been growing for me over, well, lifetime, really. Probably like many people here. I would say nature was probably my first love, and especially moving in nature. Um, and that's grown in different ways. And now it takes on a new imperative with this reality, as you describe from Joanna Macy's writing there, this reality that we're in now, that this has to become central, so that whatever we're doing, it can move towards this important work of what does Earth need, what does nature need, what does our environment need from us.
Mm-hmm. And that
So I'm straying.
inseparability of our soma from place, and really
Exactly.
honoring that more and more. I sometimes think that our somatic practices, the phrase that came to me the other day, are really rituals of remembrance. That when we
Mm,
undergo our practice, it's a ritual of remembrance, remembering the earth body through our breath, through our movement, through our stillness. And that consistent ritual is what helps us reconnect over and over and over again, which I think is really essential as things become more industrialized, more urbanized, more technological. It's like, how can we come back down to earth?
absolutely. And the word intimacy was coming to me as I was
Mm,
reflecting on our conversation. Um,
mm,
from connection to, the intimacy of being part of, the
mhm,
intimacy of not being separate from, but being inherently part of that wonderful phrase that I think Thich Nhat Hanh brought into our language, into being.
mhm,
It's a version of a Buddhist phrase, interdependence, but into being, we interbe, we coexist in this incredibly intimate way as part of, not as not we start off coming into relationship with, then we realize uh, through our somatic work, I think it can really help us to experience how we're part of, how we coexist.
mm.
We're
And I
part of
love that.
nature.
And I love that keying into the intimacy. First of all, the intimacy we have with our own soma, and then how that continues outwards. But it also makes me wonder, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts about this, the barriers to intimacy, or why that could necessarily be a scary proposition for folks.
Yes, well, as you say that, I think sometimes intimacy with nature might be less scary than intimacy with people.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
In my experience, when I just sit with that flower, that tree, that blackbird hopping around my garden, the clouds going past, when I can stop and be really still and quiet and just be with, I think that's where one of the places where that sense of intimacy with nature, and it's incredibly resourcing, reassuring for me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Intimacy with human beings is more challenging because they've got their own views and their own needs and all of that. Maybe starting with nature is a way for us to feel how we can develop intimacy, not just with those we're close to, but with humanity in a wider sense, because we're all part of this whole, this collective body that we can call humanity, perhaps the human race.
It's
So
funny.
intimate
Well, I was going to
with
say,
the body,
right,
nature,
and then others. Well,
then with it's
well,
the
it's
way it be.
right. Well, it's funny that
Yeah.
you say that, because at a certain point, I realized, in terms of doing hands-on work as part of my work, and teaching that it was starting with self, but then it was actually going out into the environment and
Mhm.
making contact with the natural world as the bridge then to then making contact with other humans. Because, like
Mm.
as you said, kind of nature is not very demanding, right? It's just there for us. And so I can have a very intimate and intricate contact with a tree, for example, and feel all those different degrees of pressure and relationship that then back and forth between self and tree and then humans. So it's funny that you mentioned that
Mm.
about that the layers of intimacy. Yeah.
Mm. It was that way for you in your
Hmm.
practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious kind
Mm.
of to then, in terms of the intimacy and the work we do somatically in the world, I'm curious about if you can say something about the relationship of body mind centering, which I imagine has been a main praxis for you for many years, that in relationship to the natural world. And yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Well, certainly a main pathway, one of my pathways, but a main one, a major one, um, in exploring this connection. So I remember one place of inspiration through Bonnie's teaching, um, gaining the understanding of how our within our body we have all the intricate systems and pathways and functions, structures that exist in the natural world. We've got our own everything, flora and fauna, and the lakes and the rivers and the oceans, and all of it exists there, and the spaces filled with air, and um, seeing that we are a microcosm, that just as we function, so does the natural world, and so does society, so does human community function. But staying with the earth and nature, and more research now into how the mycorrhizal networks between trees and plants under the soil are very reflective of the connections that are happening within our brain. I mean, it's really mind-blowing and intricate and complex, but we have this level of complexity within our own nervous system that's not unlike the level of complexity and communication that's happening between the plants and the trees
Mhm.
of the natural world. So things like this, we learn more and more about this all the time, how we're interconnected and how our own systems, internal systems, are reflected in the wider.
Mhm.
Mm.
Mhm.
So body mind centering certainly helped me, and Bonnie's teaching helped me to come to that kind of understanding, working with the body in those ever more intimate and detailed, specific ways of understanding something. I remember in my early studies thinking, there's so much money and resources going into exploring outer space, and we know hardly anything about what's going on inside of us. I think that is changing. The last few decades, there's been so much research now into the miracles that are happening within our own human bodies. But I remember that sense of the imbalance and the resource that's going out there into exploring worlds that are out of reach, when this world that's absolutely here and available to us at every moment is almost being overlooked for a long time,
Mhm.
changing now.
Yeah.
And as that changes, not only our connections to the Earth body, but the cosmic body more and more. I think more will be revealed about that, as how our the miracles of our internal soma is connected to a wider and wider reality. Yeah.
We are stardust. We are made of stardust, right? I mean, that's
Yes,
it's kind of
yes, we
as Joni Mitchell would say, we are
all that
stardust, we are
wisdom,
golden, right?
all
And
that
and
wisdom from the 60s and 70s, which some of us grew up with.
right.
And now there is more and more scientific evidence that there was actually something in it. Mm,
Mhm.
yeah.
But along those lines, though, it's like you say that the quest for outer space and really looking outward, and it almost seems like the dharma of the times is not only looking
Mm,
inward, but also looking into the body of the earth and how we can
mm,
steward the earth as a way to mitigate the damage that's been caused by human behavior. And so there is a lot
mm,
of research and action now with restoring wetlands, trees, wetlands as ways to soak carbon into the ground, as ways to clear the atmosphere. So meanwhile, we've got the tech crowd, the green energy crowd, and that's important, but more and more rewilding is happening, reintroducing beavers. I know in the UK there's a big emphasis on reintroducing beavers to help create more wetlands. So, this
mm,
simultaneous process of our somatic inquiry, understanding more and broadcasting the wisdom of the body to people, simultaneously, there is a whole group of earth stewards trying to make an impression through their actions. So those two forces are,
mm.
and
Absolutely.
that's what gives
And
me hope. That's what gives me
yes, me too. And I see them as not separate.
right.
Um, it's been my own personal research. It was going to be a workshop 5 years ago, and then the pandemic put an end to that, and it hasn't quite come about yet. But I think a lot about the relationship between our bodily symptoms and planetary symptoms, and what we can learn from our own healing processes
Mm,
that might be relevant for the planetary healing, and vice versa, what we can learn from nature and how nature will heal itself when it's left to itself or given the right kind of support, and what that might inform us about our own healing. I think these are very much connected, and we can learn one from the other. One of yes, I like what you're saying, Jamie. In nature-based solutions are so important
mhm,
in this restoration.
mhm,
And it does concern me. Yes, we've got to the point where we need the tech energy solutions as well, but they always have consequences. I see that in my own body. When something has got to the point where I need medical intervention, it's great that that can be done, and it has consequences. The
right.
body will never be quite as it was. So I think it's the same in nature. When we're talking about burying nuclear waste or carbon
Mhm,
for centuries, what are the implications of that? But we get to a certain point where that has to be done, perhaps. But I think it's important to keep that in mind, the difference between nature-based solutions,
mhm. It's
seeing those
interesting that
in.
you mentioned that because I think of years ago, I understood this distinction in French between soft medicine and hard medicine, médecin deux,
Mhm.
médecin deux, and which I found fascinating that you start with soft medicine. And if that doesn't work, you go for the, heavier duty things, whether it's drugs, surgery, whatever. And I know here in the US, we go for the hard medicine first without kind of like looking at
Mhm.
the nature-based solutions or what can help. And in that sense, I do think of our somatic work as folk medicine in a way, as soft
Mhm.
medicine, as a way to begin from this collaboration with our own bodies to find healing. And then maybe we may need to do, more intense things, but that at that base, we do have access to movement, breath, hands on healing,
Mhm.
basically the indigenous folk healings that
Mhm.
humanity has used for millennia.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I totally agree. And that should be where we all start. And I'm sure everyone here is very much engaged with that kind of practice. And that the hard medicine, I like that, medicine's last resort and sometimes necessary. But yeah, there's so much we can do. And so the same with nature healing,
Mhm.
restoration, starting with the soft medicine. Yeah, I take that soft and hard medicine.
And
Yeah.
and and I'm struck in this kind of as a thread in the conversation, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, is that, of course, as we know, we could probably look around at the video right now, that most of the participants here are women, and that in terms of this kind of earth-based medicine, soft medicine, the wise women healers that have been throughout history, I'm curious uh, what you think in terms of kind of somatic work and the work you do as a representative, perhaps of the female element, feminine energy. I mean, just thoughts you
Mm.
might have about that,
Mhm.
because that feels essential in
Well,
terms of thinking of the spirit of the work.
yes. Well, I do want to say first, I have great appreciation and respect for the minority of men who join this work. That feels really important to me, but that there are men, and yes, um, the women are in the majority. I feel it's a sign of um, the times, if you like, the age we're in, um, collectively, culturally, where that old patriarchal way and of dominance, of top-down thinking and organizing, um, systems that can oppress, all of that, everyone knows about it.
Mhm.
I do feel we're approaching the end of that. We're in the death throes of that, it feels to me. There are some um, powerful representatives of that approach. You've mentioned one earlier. Um, but it's felt to me for a long time like this clinging on to this old order. It's true. We're moving beyond. We have to move beyond it. Um, but there is this clinging on that is quite dangerous because there is a whole movement, a whole energy, a whole movement towards a more what can I say? Towards a way of being together that is more relational. There's more respect, there's more consideration, there's more empathic relating, concern for what's happening to others beyond our immediate circle, and all sorts of qualities that we think of, we label as the feminine as opposed to the masculine. We are in this change, and if we look back um, 3, 4, 5 decades, we actually can see we've come a long way. There's still a long way to go, but we have come a long way since I was beginning in this field of work.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
somatics has been quietly, a lot of women, mainly women, quietly beavering away there, beavering, maybe even like the beavers,
Uh-huh.
beavering away at these practices, quietly getting on with it in our studios and circles and so on, sometimes out in the nature. Yeah. So the feminine, it's absolutely, it's not about gender.
Right.
Men are, please come, join. Really important. But I know in my own teaching over the years and in my training programs, um, I could see in the beginning how some men really struggled, that they wanted more um, definite information,
Mm.
definite structures and protocols. And because what I was teaching was very much an inquiry and exploration, stepping into the not knowing together. So I remember that, especially in the earlier days, some discomfort from, and some of the men who would come, not all, but some would express that, but, what do we do? What's the protocol? Where are the lists? And where's the proof and all of this? So stepping into a way of working that's more about exploring and being with the not knowing, being with the mystery, being with allowing something time to unfold, rather than wanting it to be known and structured right away. So I think I mean, I'm going back a few decades, 3 or more decades, and I do feel a lot of change now. The men who I've worked with in more recent years been just incredibly open and intuitive and sensitive, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Mhm.
It's not about men and women,
Right.
but it is about more men being willing to be open to this way of work. I hope that happens. It's important. Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that there's, it definitely has been a sea change, in the last 30, 40 years. I agree with you. And of course, here in the US, we get the disparaging remarks about what, they call the soy boys, the soft men. And oh yeah, yeah, it's, it's America. What can I tell you? We're still cowboys at heart in some respects, but
Yeah.
so there is that shift. There's still like you say, there's the resistance against that change of consciousness. And I was thinking as you were speaking, you know, about your experience with men and your trainings. I think that seems to me, how do we create the bridge between those two forms of consciousness? The list takers, the protocols, I want a goal, with the explorers, the staying open to process. And I think that integration and synthesis is really an essential part in the shifting of consciousness. So we have a big tent that we are inclusive in what we are offering people. Because, of course, as we all know, all of our different disciplines can become mini cults with their own jargon and their own ways of doing things. So, how do we open the field for more inclusivity?
Yes. And do you think that maybe this uh, growing availability of scientific research and evidence into the soma um, is maybe helpful in, one of the things that might be helpful in that, because we have to appeal to the mind. A lot of it, I went for 10 years, beginning of my somatic journey. I hardly read a book. I just, completely in
Mm-hmm.
movement and body work. Um, but at some point we have to include the mind and the creative mind, and so I think that might be not all of it, but a part of it, that respecting that the mind needs that. How can I say this? So not the old way of top down,
Mhm.
mind first, then body, but the new way of body first, then coming into the mind, into the understanding, into the articulation, into the signs
Mhm.
and so on.
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, I think it's a really big question that you're asking. How can our practice and our field be perceived as more inclusive? Um, mm.
Mm.
I remember once, many years ago, having a one dance group workshop where there were equal men and women, and oh, it was such a joy. There was such a beautiful energy. It was so full of life, and so I know that's a great potential, that when we really are, when we can all come together in that way.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
But
that
I'd love to hear, as a man, what your thoughts are on that too. How do we how do we open to that more inclusive approach?
well, I think it's, partly what you said in terms of, you know, bringing the mind in, because of course we do need context. We do need to reflect, find meaning, and then how can that guide us, even on the level of, I'm going to give myself a task, a movement task, and then see what happens. So I can, like, set a goal or an idea or an intention. Um, because of course, we have the old saying, from the 60s, get out of your head and into your body, right? And that was like the thing. And I think now
Yeah.
we're discovering more and more that actually, to get inside the head, where there's all these cranial nerves and so much going on, that actually it's getting into the head as a way to be more in the body. So
Mm, mm.
it's mixing it all up, and not privileging one over the other. I think it's really,
Yes. Yeah.
and I think that's part of the bridge.
Yes.
How can we equalize the field? And like you said, it's the research that's happening, and a lot of it, of course, kind of started with the research into mindfulness, thanks to John Kabat-Zinn insinuating his programs in medical centers here in the United States. And of course, if something's in a medical center, then it's worthy of study. And of course, that really started the trickling of research. So it's what's interesting is what I sometimes think of as the kind of the male oriented approach to the body of mindfulness is what kind of opened the door to more and more of the, for lack of a better word, the feminine somatic arts to also be investigated. Uh,
Yes.
so I think there's possibility there, and as we all know, at the same time, the scientific mind has its limitations that sometimes cannot really see into the spirit of our work, the kind of the non-rational, the ephemeral. And so I'm curious, especially kind of, and I
Yeah.
imagine you've contemplated that question just from looking at the title of your book and reading some of your work. It's just, how do you square that? How do you think of that?
Mm. Well, you mentioned at the beginning about the connection between masculine and feminine. I think of that, the marriage, I called it in some of my earlier writing. The marriage, they're not going to become the same, of course. They need to retain their own quality. Um, but a partnership, yeah, that coming together so that something new is created. And I come here to the embryology, which is one of the themes of the book, when the masculine and the feminine, the sperm and the egg come together, new life is created. When they don't come together, they die. And that's can be physical in that case. It can be metaphoric. It can be creative. It can be psychological. But and we're in a very polarized, we're talking about the polarities. We're in an incredibly polarized world, and these people who call you, what was it, the soy boys?
Soy boys.
Um, I've not heard that before. Um, that's incredibly polar. How do you start to communicate with those people and they with you? But that's that polarization. If the polarities can't come together, then new life doesn't emerge. So
Right.
it's incredibly important. I've found myself trying to think and read things where the other perspective is put forward. I don't know if you know this this book by Charles Eisenstein,
Mm,
um,
I don't know.
um, a new story, because he did something I think quite brave to really seriously investigate the arguments of both sides, both the climate activists and scientists and environmentalists, but also the climate deniers. And, to really give a platform to understand what it is they're saying and where they're coming from. And his conclusion at the end, if I can very briefly paraphrase, is that we have to love nature, we have to love the earth. And that after all of this incredible investigation, that's what it led him to. So probably all of us here have started there. So we start there and we finish there.
Mm,
But at some point, do we have to seriously look into, there's an article I read about the fans of Trump, and to try to really understand who they are, why they think that way, why they vote that way. Otherwise, we're two polarities forever moving further apart. So the body, right at the beginning in the conception, gives us a way. The way is for the polarities to come together. Um,
mm.
of course, that's not so easy
Right.
in our social political world, but it's there, it's there in our biology. This is what has to happen for new life. So in whatever little ways each of us can find, whether it's through our personal research, reading, um, there's tasks as you described, setting ourselves the task and the little ways that we can do that. We're kind of creating pathways for this coming together, I think. Mm.
Yeah,
Because I
it's
don't think
essential.
there's been one.
Well, it's essential, and especially, coming back to this notion of love, which can sometimes sound kind of sentimental or very conceptual, but what does it to feel love,
Mm.
to feel love,
Mm.
to actually sense it, to reverberate with that, to really let that,
Mm.
in a sense, guide our actions in a different way. So, for example,
Mm.
so since we're doing show and tell with books, um, here is he, Andreas Weber,
Mm.
The Biology of
Mm.
Wonder. And
Mm.
he's amazing because he's kind of started his career as a biologist and became a philosopher and a writer, and exquisite. But one of the things he mentions in his book is that we know that physical actions change us. So he said that in the research, people that smile a lot become happier because they're smiling. So there's this feedback system between our action and actually how it's changing us. And for me, that's very exciting because really coming back to this idea of starting with ourselves and our own personal empowerment, how do we take advantage of and collaborate with the nature of our own body that we haven't discovered because we've been so looking at the stars, so to speak, or thinking into our computers or all of this. But this is really an important inquiry that
Yes.
is part of this healing and the mind change and the love change that's required.
And absolutely what we do in somatic work.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
So before we kind of open the floor for responses, because I realize I could go on and on with you and it'd be very easy, but I
Mm.
realize that we still have about 25 minutes or so for interacting. But is there anything that you would kind of like to just offer as a kind of closing statement at this point, or just something to wrap up?
Yes, I think we've sort of been touching around this, and you asked me earlier about an action. I think I want to bring in that old Taoist idea of non-action, because of course there's lots of actions, and the beavers and the wetlands and all the things that you were suggesting earlier. There's lots of things that need to be done, but non-action that taking that time just to be present with nature, with one little, one flower, one tree, one cloud, one blade of grass. And we all sort of know this, but we probably don't do it very much in our busy lives. So when I really remember to do this, and I just sit and I'm present with that specific expression of nature, of earth. And what starts to come is amazing. It's not necessarily a message or
Mhm.
instruction, but a quality of being. I get to know the quality of being of that tree, that flower. So just taking time, I was on the beach the other day and just standing at the water's edge and just being with the waves coming in. And I just started to feel, oh, this is such a gift. The ocean is giving to me
Mm.
wave after wave after wave. The ocean is giving to me. And it felt like love. It felt like, oh, I'm just being given all this love. So this reciprocal connection, that love from the ocean, that friendliness from the flower, that curiosity of the bird in the garden, whatever it might be, that's in me. That's the intimacy I think I was talking about earlier. It's in both of it. We're connected in that moment in a very um, intimate way. So my suggestion
Mhm.
is just take a few moments each day, and it might just be a plant on your windowsill if you don't have much easy access to outdoors. Just a few moments to do nothing as a basis for every action, any action, but um, the non-action of being present, the
Mm.
being with.
A
Yeah.
ritual of remembrance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The non-doing. Yeah. It's beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to open up the chat. And Linda, do you want to say anything? I'm going to put your information in the chat, but do you want to say you had also included some links to some other groups and anything you want to say about those other
Oh,
groups?
ever so briefly, yes. Because I think also what we're talking about in terms of somatic work, inner work of all sorts, there's a field of practice called subtle or sacred activism. And I feel that somatic work can be seen and experienced as part of that. So as alongside the the activism, the active work in the world that is also needed. But the subtle activism happens in our inner practice, whether it's alone or whether it's in groups. And there are more and more groups of people globally practicing towards this new era that we hope is coming. So yes, I do want to say this. The news is sometimes so bad we can feel despair, but I feel there are an awful lot of people who are practicing individually, in circles, in groups, globally. There is a lot of subtle or sacred activism going on. We don't hear about it. It's not in the news, but that gives me hope, actually, because this is the part of the changing of consciousness that is needed. And when it becomes big enough, strong enough, widespread enough, it starts to have a real impact, I believe. So your somatic work can be part of that movement if you see it in that way.
So the links you'll see in the chat are groups like Tree Sisters, Gaia Mandala. This is part of the sacred activism you're talking about, I imagine.
Yes, and not yes, and not specifically somatic, but more of a sacred or subtle activism. So if anyone is interested in that direction.
And I would say that that kind of connecting with organizations like that is how we bring our own medicine and magic to those gatherings. I know that a very important part of, for example, Extinction Rebellion were the figures dressed in red. Even just the symbolism of that group moving through the town squares as part of Extinction Rebellion made a big emotional impact for a lot of people. I was very interested when I saw them in Oxford and then hearing other people's reports. I know somebody who performed as one of the red people. And so, yes, how we bring our somatic, bodily, expressive presence out into the world also is a way to move action. So I want to thank you for this rich conversation. I mean, like I said, we go on, but I know there's people that would like to speak, ask questions. So feel free to either uh, raise your hand or put something in the chat. I see a Zoom user raised hand. Yes, asked to unmute. Go ahead, Zoom user.
Hello, this is Aisling speaking. Thank you so much to both of you. My goodness, this is just such a nourishing experience to be part of. And I've two things just to bring in, if it's okay. The first is I'm an on-off PhD student studying somatic psychology and leadership. And Linda is actually my theorist in practice, but I'd like to actually ask her permission rather than something around just naming that. And if it's okay to send Linda an email, I'd just like to actually connect with her as a human being and not just pluck something out of the abstract as I'm doing my research. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I think you've both spoken a lot to this anyway, but just something that was coming to me around what Nora Bateson has highlighted, which is the danger of recreating the paradigm we're trying to change when it comes to our activism, and how to catch that within the self and how to really deepen that attunement so that we can listen to that slipstream of life that wants to course through us. So yeah, just a piece around that. I know a lot has already been said around it, but that's what I'm with. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think maybe that's where the the inner work, that's whether it's somatics or subtle activism or whatever, meditation, whatever, whatever pathways we're taking, does need to be part of this. So I think we know that activism can become aggressive sometimes. I'm thinking of protests and so on, not the sort of things, the nature-based practices Jamie was talking about at the beginning, but I think the balancing of the inner work with the outer activity, whatever it may be, feels important. I'm not sure if that speaks to your question. Jamie, you might want to add something.
Well, I think that kind of as you mentioned that we do have a habit of protest being as a way to discharge energy, to kind of to raise the fire, to be very outwardly aggressive in some ways. And I've kind of asked myself, how can we update the choreography of protest to include all these different qualities of being? And because I'm struck by that some people get very afraid of protest. They're afraid of that strong energy. And so, just as a very quick reflection, uh, the women's march that happened after the first Trump election, there was actions all over in streets, different places. And in San Francisco, we created a ritual based around two caskets with American flags on them, and a group of us who had kind of come together, and I created a series of gestures that we did along the way. And sometimes it was just stopping, being silent, making contact with ourselves, making eye contact with people around us, and then carrying on. And so there was different kind of affect qualities, and people started joining us. They began to realize, oh, I can do that. Or, oh, that feels really nice to listen to the bells you're playing and to join you. And so we became kind of an oasis in the sea of the march. And for me, that's one of the ways that we can contribute as artists, activists, and dancers in terms of bringing bodily presence and different states of being to mass protest, to once again make what we're doing more inclusive. So that's just a thought from my own experience.
Yeah, thank you. I really hear the qualities of beauty and presence as possibilities within protest. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? Andrew, can you unmute yourself?
Hello there.
Hi.
Yeah.
Great.
Hi. Yeah, what you've just said is really interesting. Thank you both for doing this. Yeah. I've been I kind of got this long-term project of looking at how what goes on inside us reflects nature. And I kind of think if it doesn't reflect nature in some way, then, or is reflected by nature, then something not quite right. And I I'm struggling to find where protest is found in nature, and and but what you've just described there, Jamie, yeah, that is you get a change in state in one place, and then things notice it and start to decide whether they want to join in or not. For sure, that's what we see. So I'm kind of I'm just kind of wondering if that's really the what needs to be done more. And um, I'm also wondering if anyone has any ideas of correlationships between what goes on in nature, including us, including our bodies, with in any way that anything there correlates with protest.
Mm.
And yeah, it's just a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can share something that came up for me very recently. I just woke up one day feeling this anger, and it was really deep in my belly. And what is this about? I couldn't really place it. And then I thought about the fires in Los Angeles, and it suddenly made sense. Suddenly I felt part of this bigger process, and it became for me more manageable. And yeah, I know it's a bit fanciful, but we can think of fires and earthquakes and floods is this nature's way of protesting. I just pose that as a maybe, but we can look at it that way. I know there's other aspects to it, of course, but it felt like something's not right, and so Earth maybe has its way of protesting in the same way that something surges up in us as a protest, as a expression of this isn't okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. I was just letting all that kind of circulate in me, and also just this idea of there's so much going on for all of us in relationship to world events, in relationship to what's happening to the planet, in our communities, and how do we give voice to that outside of just, countless letters to the editor, or, the world of words. How can the primacy of our affect states find form and meaning with each other? And so I, uh, I wasn't expecting protest to come up, but it's, like I said, it kind of tipped me back 7 years to when we did that 8 years ago, when we did that event. And it's just like, okay, how might that manifest now with a somatic sensibility, with a sense of, yeah, really remembering that we all matter, right? That I like the word matter, that earth matters, earth is matter, we are matter, we matter, and all of us have a voice, a platform, a movement inherent in us that can join up with these other cells, right? Just the way the cells kind of migrate together and, you know, uh, move towards a danger together. There's that mobilization of cells, white blood cells when there's a danger in the body. That how do we find our way with each other, not in ways that we couldn't even imagine, to express more and more of our individual voice within a collective voice, within a collective choir. See, boy, I don't know how to.
Shannon.
Thank you. I was like, what is
it's an Irish thing.
Yes, I'm sure it is.
Love those consonants. This has been really wonderful, and I'm sort of coming at metabolizing a lot of these words through different venues that I'm working in. I my first career was as a ballet dancer, professional ballet dancer. Became injured, left that field, went into wildlife rehabilitation, wildlife restoration work, dancing with animals, basically, and seeing that as a connection. Dance is a dialogue, and we're all connected. And I think it's so easy to get lost in how do we help people see a connection when we simply are connected. It's just recognizing that. And like right now, I'm in a PhD program. Went from getting my degree in dance, nature, and healing, and now I'm doing a PhD in leadership and change. And so looking at how dance as a dialogue can help us create nature-centered leadership for more regenerative futures. And seeing that as a way of living our connection and our connectedness. So that one group I work with is global water dances, where we're doing dances to raise awareness about water conditions around the world, right? And that's focusing a lot on movement, sometimes in a protest type of orientation. But I'm not even seeing that as protest anymore. I'm seeing that as trying to illustrate balance and where balance has been lost. Where balance is lost, we have flooding, we have droughts, we have fires, because balance has been put out of balance. And how do we get that teeter-totter back into, a mode that works? And how do we create that dance so that we're all part of that? And another group I work with is the International Leadership Association, which when I first walked into their first meeting, I felt like a total outlier because I was surrounded by people in suits, a lot of people with MBAs. And I was like, I'm just a flaky dancer. Who's going to listen to me? And I'm now leading workshops within that group. And this kind of also looks at the gender issues where there's a lot of men in that organization. There's a growing number of women, but MBAs. So there's a specific language that they're attaining. And it's not terribly holistically focused. And so trying to open that up and help people see and feel their connectedness in a conference room in Chicago has been a really fascinating experience. And being able to have people come up to me that I would never in a million years have picked out of a crowd, to walk up and go, that was an incredibly profound experience. I felt truly connected to air, earth, water, fire. I get people up and moving and, visualizing, sensing, metabolizing the idea of earth, water, fire, and air just as a start. And, and go, okay, can this make a behavioral shift that will make ripples on the pond and influence people to make changes in all of their own little worlds where they are, and hopefully move away from that silo effect and get people intersecting and interweaving their ways of thought together. So anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to babble on for so long, but this has been really thought-provoking. So I thank you both.
Well, it was a wonderful babble because I very much just illustrating how you are building bridges. And I love that state change in yourself from perceiving yourself as a flaky dancer to understanding, oh, I have something to offer, even if it's not part of the dominant paradigm I'm walking into. So I just want to acknowledge that and the journey you're on and kind of what you're illuminating for all of us, what is possible.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thanks. It's been quite a journey.
Yes, also, I just want to say it's so inspiring to hear what you're doing. And it kind of affirms what I was saying a moment ago. There are so many people out there doing, already doing this work in so many different ways. So you give me a little bit of hope. Thank you.
And you, me.
So we're at time, and I just want to kind of honor our kind of agreement with each other time-wise, but I really want to encourage those of you who are not members of ISMETA. ISMETA is a very inclusive organization, and our work counts on not only practitioners, but also on people who really want to be part of our vision. So if you check out our website, there's many different ways that you can become a member, an associate member, a student member. There's a lot of varieties of membership. And Ismeta also has a lot of offerings to the community. So, you know, bookmark Ismeta. And otherwise, I want to thank Elizabeth for kind of spurring this series on. And thank you very much, Linda, for being my guest. And I've got to say, it's a delight also doing this series, meeting people I might not otherwise be in direct contact with. And Linda and I both kind of started as, if I remember correctly, as English majors. So it's interesting that we had a similar departure point and have now found ourselves in the swirl and the mix of our respective somatic worlds. And so it's a delicious delight to be connected to you and in conversation. So thank you for all that you bring.
Well, thank you, Jamie. It's been a pleasure and an honor, and I'm so glad you're doing this. Really important to connect us all within this field. And yes, Elizabeth and Ismeta, because we ever so briefly touched on Nest. Ismeta to me is so important in that idea of the place of holding for our work as we and helping so much with that process of bringing somatic work into a wider community. So yeah, thank you both. It's been a real pleasure. And everyone who came, thank you for joining us, or
Thank
will
you.
come in the
Yes.
future.
Thank you for taking the time to join us and be part of our circle. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so very much. And if you'd like to stay updated about ISMETA activities, I put the link to sign up for our newsletter in the chat. And I just wanted to mention to this group in particular that we have a conference coming up in Spain in September. And the title, the theme is Cultivating Connections, Somatic Movement with Ourselves, Others, and the Earth. So that's hot off the presses, breaking news. A call for proposal will come shortly. And would love to continue these conversations, Jamie, not only through future podcasts, which you will continue coordinating. That's the intention, right?
Yes, it is.
But also through these other ISMETA events as well. So many thanks.